So I felt like talking about the original Metal Gear Solid, and you might say I'm a little bit late to this party, given that this game came out, in the last century. But I was basically building like a hype train for myself before the release of Death Stranding 2, and from everything I've heard about the first Death Stranding, which I initially wanted to play some time ago, I've heard that it's like a very Hideo Kojima game in the sense that not everyone will love it, and you kind of have to like give in to your love for Hideo Kojima in many places to be able to appreciate that game. So I was like, I've always wanted to play the Metal Gear Solid series, and uh, I recently bought a Steam Deck, so I kind of have a pretty large backlog of games that I've been wanting to play, including old games. So I thought before the release of Death Stranding 2, might as well play Metal Gear Solid. And another tangent about why I wanted to play Death Stranding 2 is because I'm an international student, so at my university, I don't really have a PlayStation. That's partly the reason why I bought the Steam Deck, because I felt like playing games over there, didn't really have a lot of time. So yeah, I've come back home for my summer vacations and I wanted something to play on my PlayStation 5 now that I'm here. And it kind of just felt like the perfect game that I would be able to jump into when it releases next month, I think. And so, yeah, I decided to play the first Metal Gear Solid and I loved it. I thought it was a fantastic game, and there are many things in it that today, like in hindsight, I can appreciate a lot. But I think it's kind of like a double edged sword in the sense that a lot of it is extremely frustrating to play. Being someone who has not played a lot of old games and is more used to the modern format of gaming that we are now in, a lot of the controls are like really, really archaic. And like, also, I'm not used to playing a lot of top down games, so that was something new for me as well. And there's a lot of like, I want to say, like, there's a lot of variables that I don't know how they will play into the game, because it's difficult to time space playing the game in present day and compare it to what the technology was able to do at the time. For instance, I know that Metal Gear Solid was a breakthrough in storytelling and action and these types of games that I have come to love in their modern form today, but me as someone playing the game in 2025, I don't necessarily know everything that video games were capable of doing back then and what Kojima was able to innovate on top of that. So, like, just as an example, the first time I ran through a puddle, I didn't know that my footsteps would be heard by the guards when I ran through a puddle. Like, that's not technology I expected to exist at that point. And I think a lot of the greatness of Metal Gear Solid comes from the fact that a lot of people at that time also did not expect that technology to exist. So it's kind of like interesting how I experience it playing the game today versus how people would have initially experienced it when they played it then. And a lot of YouTube content creators that I like to watch now, Metal Gear Solid was kind of like their childhood and their introduction to these types of action games. And I think playing the game made me agree with a lot of things that they kind of talk about. Firstly, is like this idea of like slightly ghastly kind of setting with some aspect. I don't know if I should call it horror, but like a thriller suspense thing going on with the entire theme and vibe of the game. Everything from the music to just the color palette, the blues and the purples of the snow in the outdoors, and the pixelated art direction by Yoji Shinkawa. I think it really lends itself extremely well to the genre, and the amount of jump scares I've had playing this game when um I didn't expect a guard to be down a corridor, and I keep forgetting that I can view in first person mode, and I just walk in and I would hear that alert sound. The amount of times I've jumped up in my seat. And I was playing this game on an airplane, And I think the person sitting next to me started thinking that I was going crazy playing this pixelated game and having jump scares because of the alert sound. But um, nonetheless, yeah, I think it is an extremely well made game, especially for its time. But I also think it's one of the most frustrating experiences I've had playing a video game that is not like like a really hard Souls boss. And I think part of the reason for that is the controls and some things that are not immediately intuitive to someone like me who's playing this game in 2025 versus when perhaps it first came out. And so, yeah, like some things like long, not even that long in this game, but some of the codec conversations, some of the cutscenes, those things I knew to expect when I walked in. But yeah, especially all the shooting sequences, and I feel like the game sets weird precedences for its own controls that it doesn't always abide by. One thing that comes to mind is at the very end, the gunfight sequence with Liquid Snake when you're in the car. First of all, I didn't know that you could go into first person and shoot. And that I think comes from the fact that you're not allowed to do that in the game. Like if you go into first person mode, you can't pull out a gun in Metal Gear Solid 1, the original version. And I played the HD collection on the Steam Deck without any mods or anything like that. So yeah, you can't do that in the game, but in that ending section, you can go into first person mode and shoot, which was something that was not intuitive to me, and I only figured it out after a few tries. In fact, I think I actually had to Google that because I thought I was doing something wrong. So while I was trying to do it in third person also, when Liquid Snake like comes up right next to your Jeep and you're kind of firing at each other, my like Solid Snake does not turn his gun to the left for some reason. I don't know if this is a bug or if this is just something that was part of the game, but if you hold the analog stick to the left, Snake just does not turn left. You have to go all the way around 360 and turn it to be able to face where Liquid Snake was. Now, again, this might just be a bug, but there are instances like that where the precedence in the game mechanics itself does not exist for the ideal way to be playing certain sections, such as not being able to shoot in first person for the entire game, but then in the very last sequence of the game, it does work. So things like that were definitely frustrating for me. The tower sequence, I think some of it is also on me that I didn't use my gadgets very well and I was kind of relying on just shooting, but aiming in that sort of system with holding square and trying to hit the enemies was extremely frustrating for me as an experience, and it definitely weighed down all the great things that I could see about this game that at the time were probably revolutionary, and still today to an extent you do not see many experimental things that you would not see in video games today because of their expansive nature and how much money goes into development cycles, that those kind of risks are just not something people are willing to take anymore. I thought the boss fights in this game were absolutely incredible, but again, the boss fights kind of mirror the feelings I have about this game as a whole, in that there's a lot of wonderful novel ideas that exist within every single boss fight, and there are exceptional mechanics that play into boss fights, but I feel like I only appreciate them in hindsight and as sort of tools of the director and the team in making this an enriching experience. But they also remind me a lot of like gimmick boss fights in Souls games where if you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, you could hit your head against the wall 1,000 times and it just would not work. And I feel like, again, I think at some points you can codec in the kernel or Campbell to kind of find out what you're supposed to be doing, but that's not something that again came to me intuitively that would be the system of hints in the game, because again, in modern video games that's not what instinctively came to me. But yeah, like a lot of the parts in boss fights. For example, the Cyborg Ninja or Gray Fox boss fight, right? You have to fight him with your bare hands or like unarmed. And in the fight, he keeps saying that your weapons will do no damage to me. And that's like, to me, as someone approaching that game today, it felt like something cool a villain would say, right? Like villains all the time are harping on about how you can't touch them and your weapons are too weak for them, and that's what I thought it was. But the fact that it was actually that you were supposed to fight him with only your fists, and that's like a callback to whenever Snake fought Grey Fox in Zanzibar or in the previous game, which I have not played, Metal Gear 1 and 2. Um, so yeah, that's like something that is quite mind blowing once you figure it out and once it starts working and once you look back on the fight in hindsight. But I feel like while I was playing it, it felt like if I did not kind of go onto Google or try to figure it out in other ways, I would probably never figure it out. And that's something that is quite frustrating to me as a player. And it just might be that I'm used to having more guided experiences at this point, which is really sad because I can see how figuring that out in that time frame by yourself would have been that moment of epiphany or revelation, which did happen for me later on in the game when I kind of started to understand the ways that the game worked and the kind of little tricks that it pulled. I think like when I got to the Palki section and I was trying to get it cold, and I was hanging out in the Vulcan Raven final boss fight, waiting for it to give me an indication that it's now worked, and I kept opening the menu, and then I saw that the actual color of the Palki changed to blue. That's when I had that kind of epiphany moment that for me felt like, oh, so this is what people felt like when they first played that Cyborg Ninja fight or that Psycho Mantis fight, and they figured out what was happening inside of the game. And I can absolutely appreciate that. But again, it was difficult for me to put myself in that headspace of understanding what the known and unknown quantities were in 1998 at the time this game was released, to be able to kind of figure out that this might be something I have to do or this might be something I can do in order to progress in the game. Um, this also extends to a few other fights. For instance, the iconic Psycho Mantis fight that I'd heard so much about to this point. And through that, I think Campbell actually does give you instructions where you have to like change your controller from port A to port B so that he can't read your mind anymore. But like I mentioned, I was playing on the Steam Deck, and I didn't even know that you can pause and press L1 R1 to bring up that overlay menu of like the launcher of the HD collection. And so for me, it was so some of that charm and that uniqueness while actually playing the game was lost for me, except for in moments where it did click for me what the game probably expected me to do, or the little novelties that the game is able to throw your way in its innovation and how it really engages you in the world. But I feel like nonetheless, once I finished the entire experience, I was able to appreciate all of those things and really put my so basically what I'm saying is, in hindsight, I was able to put myself in that place of understanding that yes, this was probably something that was genre defining and mind bending at the time that this game was released. But while I was playing the game itself, I was going more through frustrations of the controls, of things not being intuitive or instinctive that I could figure out in not the first try, but even the fourth, fifth, sixth try of attempting a boss fight. And also, I feel like something that really plays into that idea in today's world is that it is extremely easy to just go onto Google and find out what you're supposed to be doing, and it's kind of difficult to resist that feeling when you're frustrated playing the game itself. So for instance, when I was fighting again the Cyborg Ninja, I was trying to use the shaft grenades to kind of lower his capabilities because I figured that would make sense since he's, a cyborg, and so the given what the chaff grenade is usually able to do, I thought that was something that probably was the way that you complete the fight, and it did work in the sense that you could get off a few hits on him, but I was clearly seeing that this is not the optimal way of doing this. And when you're in that frustration and it's taking that long to finish a fight, and you know you're doing something wrong, but you can't really figure out what it is extremely easy to just go onto forums or Google and just see what you're supposed to be doing. And again, that might be a little bit on me as the player of resisting that, to have that sense of reward and final kind of feeling of, yeah, I figured this out by myself and it's kind of mind blowing. But going back to the ideas that exist in this game, whether that be the Psycho Mantis fight and all of its kind of psychedelic mind games that it plays with you, to very simple things like when you're firing or using a sniper rifle, if you don't take the diazepam, you kind of just like keep spazzing out and it's extremely difficult to control. Things like that I can really appreciate for what they try to do. And things that don't happen in games, those are things that don't happen in games even today. And I feel like seeing some of those things in action was really kind of eye-opening in terms of things that games have kind of abandoned over time. And it's interesting to think about that. Is that something that people just think is inconvenient in games like this, where like shooting is kind of one of the core pillars of what you're going to be doing in the game if you do get seen, or if it's something that was initially an innovation but just somewhere or the other was lost in carrying things over from generation to generation or taking inspiration from one game to another. But overall, at the end of my ramblings, I think Metal Gear Solid 1 was an absolutely exceptional experience. I thought the story was fantastic, kind of like all the hammed up characters that remind you of like 90s 80s action films. And for me, being an Indian, having seen a lot of Bollywood cinema and cinema from the South, I think it's very reminiscent of that feeling of kind of anime in a more actiony or westernized kind of concept. Or for me, what was the idea of like over the top Indian films, where when you connect with the core of it, when you connect with the characters, that's where you find kind of the profound things that exist throughout the story, and that all of that is tied together with like this bow of over the top action, like absolutely 200 cool factor, and style just oozes from every single aspect of the story, of the setting, of all the dialogue. And I thought all of that was absolutely exceptional. And even with all the games that are like extremely story heavy and single player games that I've played today, I don't think there's anything like the fundamental story of Metal Gear Solid, ahead of like, you know, the idea of two brothers and one is better than the other, but like all the twists and turns along the way and how the game ties that in with the gameplay mechanics, with the boss fights, with basically payoffs for every single character, where everyone is memorable, and simple things in the game that act as gameplay mechanics, for example just saving the game with mailing, also become part of the story, and everything is justified as to why it's there. And it feels like the perfect 10 to 12 hours that I'm willing to spend in this world, while also building hype for the sequel and not making me feel kind of like I need a break before I jump into Metal Gear Solid 2. So yeah, I think it was an exceptional game, which was held back for me personally because of a few frustrations that developed because of the time that has passed since this game has released. But yeah, overall I think it does some exceptional things for a game that came out like over 2 decades ago. No, yeah, over 2 decades ago at this point. So yeah, I really loved Metal Gear Solid, and I have also finished Metal Gear Solid 2, and I'm playing Snake Eater right now. So I will be talking about my thoughts on that very soon too. But yeah, that's about it for now. Peace.